Welcome to our Biz Huddle podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Cuthbert, Creative Director at Baker Creative. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it. Loki Mulholland is an Emmy award-winning filmmaker, activist, author, and supporter of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He is the founder and executive director of the Joan Mulholland Foundation, named in honor of his civil rights activist mother, that was created to end racism through education. Loki earned a bachelor's degree in film and cinema video studies from Ithaca College and a diversity and inclusion certificate from Cornell University. His work earned more than 40 Telly Awards and 20 Best Documentary Awards, with The Uncomfortable Truth film being viewed more than 3 million times. Welcome, Loki. It's really exciting to have you on our podcast.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I know you're going to be speaking at the WeBank ORV this year, and many people are very excited about that. And what inspired you to want to participate?
Well, I was invited. First and foremost, I was a little surprised. I mean, it's but they felt that there was the work that I do with my foundation, the Joan Mulholland Foundation, just was bringing the right synergy because of the intersectionality that exists in the realms that I typically focus on. That will play in well. And then, working with my mom's story as well, the things that she went through as an individual, it all plays the same. So she's just a powerful example in that respect.
Can you shed some light or for some folks that may not be familiar?
Yeah.
Just a baby version. Can you do like a snippet?
It always comes back to mom. I don't know what this is, but so by the time my mother was 19 years old, she had been involved in about 36 sit-ins and protests during the civil rights movement when she joined the Freedom Rides, and they took this famous mugshot of her that's been called one of the most, but one of the most famous mugshots in American history, quite frankly, what they say. And then she was put on death row, and she was on the Klan's most wanted list. They hunted her down for execution, but she's kind of the Forrest Gump of civil rights. It's this kind of this weird story. And if you name an event or a person, she probably knew them or was there or is connected in some fashion. And so she's this really fascinating story to tell. And part of the reason it's fascinating is because here's a woman born and raised in the South who saw what was wrong and decided to do something about it as a white woman. And our family is, her mother was a segregationist. Our family, we owned people. We go back to 1610, Jamestown. We helped start the whole thing. And so my mom comes along and works to dismantle that. And yet the bitter irony of it all, as she's fighting for civil rights, when she goes to get a job with the government, they say, we don't hire a woman because all they do is get married, have babies, and quit. So she's fighting for equality and then gets discriminated against. Go figure.
So what was it like living with that kind of legacy and story as a kid? I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, no pressure. I get asked that a lot. Like, what's it like to have a mom who's a civil rights icon? It's like, for the most part, it's just mom. That whole nonviolence thing in the movement ended when she had children because she was very quick to spank us. But when you're raising 5 boys as a single mother, I mean, we learned a lot. My wife always thanks my mom for teaching us how to do dishes and cook and vacuum and clean toilets and everything else. So, but even more so beyond that level, we wasn't a normal house, I mean, my mother probably still has the only autographed portrait of Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, in Virginia. Good grief. I mean, So those are the things that were hanging on our walls. She would take us to, hey, Desmond, Bishop Desmond Tutu is coming. Do you want to listen to him speak? And we would, people who would come to the house would be civil rights activists. But these were just her friends. And so we really didn't, know anything else. It wasn't like she was sitting us down at the table and talking about the civil rights movement, but the friends would. They would come over and start talking about, their old days in college. And when you're a kid, I mean, who wants to hear old people talk about their college days? And the photos that she had from those times were these civil rights photos. The Jackson Woolworth sit-in, where my mom is sitting at the lunch counter and they're pouring sugar on her head, like she says it to say, like it wasn't sweet enough already. But for us, that was just mom, which is a weird thing to say. It wasn't until we really got into high school when we opened the history books and there was that picture, the same picture we grew up with. And we knew it was a famous picture. But we just didn't make the connection to history until we were there and we could understand it. And it's different. I for years spent years trying to escape that shadow of my mom. It's like I want to be my own person, and yet, there's always someone in the family that I guess gets selected by default or something that carries that. I've talked to other children of prominent civil rights activists, and they're like, yeah, I mean, it's just they all go through the same thing. Mm-hmm. And yet at the end of the day, you work to preserve that legacy, and you work to what lessons can be derived from that people can learn from, because all the stories need to be told, not just the Dr. Kings and Rosa Parks. And we need to understand that every seemingly ordinary people can do extraordinary things and make a difference.
So was there, because you said you were trying to kind of make a separation, which I totally understand.
Yeah. I was like 18.
Oh, of course, So was there a turning point where you're just kind of like, you know what? I think I need to kind of, because you have so many documentaries. I mean, let's be real, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. I had someone say to me once, you're the guy who does all the civil rights stuff. I'm like, what? It just never dawned on me. We the first film we did was about my mom. It's An Ordinary Hero. It's about her life in the student movement, and we did this screening at Ole Miss. Oxford, Mississippi. Ole Miss is where James Meredith and 20,000 soldiers were called in to help, integrate the school. And my mom's, after the screening, we had these college-educated kids come up to us, right, and say, we never learned any of this. I'm sitting there going, okay, well, this is Mississippi. Yeah, they're not going to teach this sort of stuff. But it was like 80% of this movie takes place in your state. How do you not know this? It never dawned on me that people just really don't know. And when I say people, I mean white people in particular. Come to find out, a lot of African Americans don't know this history either, because, well, they had the same school books and went to the same schools, right? Mm-hmm. And just as like, I'm Irish descent. My dad never sat us down to talk about Irish heroes and and whatever else. I mean, so the grief. It's not like this happens in other households. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like, what, we need to get this to kids. They need to start learning this younger. So that's when I created the foundation and created some books and some curriculums and so forth. But then I got to do the next film and the next film. And it got to a point where I was and I'm from the South, so you can tell, it takes a long time to tell a story, get to the point. But my mother was receiving an award at the International Civil Rights Center in Greensboro. And this is where the A&T 4 sat down at the lunch counter, kicked off the student movement, basically, February 1st, 1960. And one of the children of the A&T 4 comes up to me and he says, would you have ever sat at the lunch counter? I said, oh my gosh, you get asked the same thing, don't you? He goes, all the time. He says, what do you say? I said, well, I say, I don't have to because my mother already did. Mm-hmm. He goes, oh man, I'm going to say that, I don't have to because my dad already did. I said, but hold on. There's a caveat I add to that. But I have to do what I can do because doing nothing is not an option. And while I don't have to sit at the lunch counters or ride the buses and those sort of things, do the type of things my mother did, I have to take the gifts that I've been given, which is in the film and the storytelling and so forth, and use that to move the work forward. And we all have our unique things that we have to do. Not everyone could sit down at the lunch counters and be in the demonstrations. And today, not all of us have have that ability to do so, to go to the marches and stuff for whatever reasons, that we have our own personal comfort zones and so forth. But you have to find the things that you could do and just make sure you're doing them.
How do you feel that today the activism looks a lot different than what it did when you're in the past, in the 60s and the 50s?
Oh, sure. And it looked way different from, abolitionist movement. So, I mean, there's always something going to be different, but the way we use technology and so forth today, and the word spreads, but the fundamentals remain the same. And too often we can rely too much on technology when at the end of the day, it's about people seeing the reality for, right there in front of them. And which takes place with marching, which takes place with interacting and engaging with people. I mean, or these paradigm shifts like Uncle Tom's Cabin, for example, where all of a sudden people really realize what slavery was all about. Of course, now today there's this move to try to rewrite that history again, and it's incumbent upon us to continue to speak those truths, because when they start rewriting one part of history, they're going to continue to rewrite other parts. And when it rollbacks for one group of people, it's going to roll back for everyone.
How do you see the role of education in really addressing prejudice? Because in schools, like you said, it's kind of all over the place, depending where somebody goes to school, how old the books are, what era that was.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, the role is critical. One of the, I think, the things we're missing in understanding about history and teaching, social studies and such, which isn't actually mandated in elementary school, by the way. Well, let me rephrase that. It is mandated by law. They just don't actually provide opportunities for teachers to do so. So they have to find different ways to do it. But I think the biggest thing that's missing, and we saw this in particular during COVID, was the ability to interact and connect. So a lot of people, students lost that ability to relate to people. But then the development of empathy, and understanding that while you might not, someone once said to me, you don't walk in my shoes. And I said, you're right, I don't, but I know what it's like to wear shoes. But we have to be willing to, expand our understanding and to see the world from different viewpoints. There's not one dominant viewpoint. Well, I guess yes, there is one dominant viewpoint, but we have to make sure that there's not one dominant viewpoint. I mean, for example, immigration, right? And we talk about illegal immigrants and so forth. Well, why are they coming here? If we say that we're the greatest country in the world, well, then yeah, we put that out there. Well, of course, people want to come here, but why are they coming here? And it's how do we treat people once they're here? I can sympathize a little bit because I was actually an illegal immigrant. Let me rephrase that. I was in Russia illegally for several months because I didn't know my visa expired, and they wouldn't let me leave because my visa had expired. All right, okay, but which is a great funny story in and of itself. But while I looked the part, I could look Russian, and I could speak Russian. But once I opened my mouth, you would know the difference real quick. And so I always had this hanging over my head. What if a police officer stops me for something? What if they ask for my papers? If there's too many questions, where is that going to lead to? So you always had that, so I understand a bit of that experience. I'm not going to say that I understand completely, but I can relate a little bit. And we need to learn to understand those relationship points so that we can not merely brush off the idea, well, that just doesn't happen. That's never happened to me. So why would that happen to you? Well, because I'm a woman, or well, because I'm Black, or well, because X, Y, Z. So
with my mother being from another country, I've seen firsthand how cruel people can be.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because a lot of people from other countries have 3 and 4 degrees, speak 4 languages. but somehow because you have an accent,
Right.
it's like, wait a minute, what? Wait a minute. You know, understand what this country was based on, right? I mean,
Right.
it never changed from the beginning.
But, I mean, it's literally a country of immigrants,
Yeah, right.
and literally the first ones were illegal. I hate to break it to everybody,
Yeah.
but and I say to people, it's like, God created people, not borders, right? And so we need to remember that. We forget how the Irish were treated when they came over. We forget how the Italians were treated. They were able to assimilate. The Italians were considered colored on the census until what, the 1920s or something.
Wow.
So I mean, good grief. There are always groups of people who are being looked down upon, who are perceived as a threat to the status quo, and particularly from an economic standpoint. When times get tough, people look for excuses.
With all these documentaries you have, what catches your eye to say, okay, that's worth making a film about?
That's a great question. Well, so the latest film I have is called Emmett Till, White Lies, Black Death. It's a story that's always been told of Emmett Till, but we only tell one part of the story. And the story that we tell is actually not even correct. The dominant, dominant narrative is actually a lie that was fabricated to cover up and to allow other people to get away with murder. So the way we think the story is told is actually not the real story. And so we spent 5 years working to uncover that and to be able to tell that full story. We actually just recently on August 8th, which is in Knoxville, their Juneteenth event, is that we did a screening there. And actually one of the FBI agents who was on the case when they reopened it in 2005 was at the screening and came up to me afterwards and was like, wow, you guys really nailed this one. And you got a couple of interviews. We had no idea that how did you find them? So, but there's different things that just kind of catch. Obviously, my mom's story catches my attention, right? And that led that story when we were sitting down talking to one of the people, became my mentor, Lou Von Brown, one of the Freedom Riders. Before the camera crew showed up, him and I were talking, and he said something that just I couldn't shake. He said, everyone knows where the drugs are, but you never see a SWAT team raid a university. But you'll always find them in the hood. Now, why is that? That became the uncomfortable truth. As I was waiting, the Evers family reached out to me and said, can you do what you did for your mom's story for my dad and my mom? And I said, well, yeah. But as we're waiting to make that happen, that movie called The Evers is on Showtime now. I was invited to attend this organization, Domino Foundation in Salt Lake City, Utah, that helps transracial adoption. So white families who are adopting children of color. And not a world I ever thought of. And these parents were so transparent about everything, just their biases that they had and things they've discovered about their own family members. And this is crazy. And I'm like, wow, this needs to be a documentary. So just being awake for the moments. And so, yeah, that's kind of just, and the more and more you do, the more and more you're just kind of like, I need to do this one. And here's this other story. I did a sweet story just recently, a short film about this gentleman named George Sally. He's 92 years old. Well, now he's 94. But 92 years old. Every day he goes to the Edmund Pettus Bridge to pray for the state trooper that beat him on Bloody Sunday. Ooh. It's a really powerful short film, about 8 minutes long. It's an experiment I wanted to do. But I was doing another film in Selma about voting rights and voter suppression since the Selma to Montgomery March. What's happened? And the main person we were interviewing, Joanne Bland, who was arrested, I think 9 times by the time she was 11 years old, when she was knocked unconscious on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. She briefly told me the story about George Sally, and I just tucked that in the back of my brain. I was like, you know what, I need to come back. Is he still alive? And they're like, yeah. So we did that, right? So there's different things that just kind of work for me. I've always, back in college, I read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and I always wanted to do a film, on that. And so we've shot the interviews. We haven't put the film together yet, but I was meeting with the Western. He was the former chief of the Western Band of the Shoshone Indians, which is the largest reported massacre west of the Mississippi. Is the Bear River Massacre, and most people don't know anything about it. And we were walking along, and he's, this valley, this space. And he says, beneath the feet are the bone of my ancestors. This is where the massacre took place. And he asked me, he says, can you tell our story? And I said, well, yeah. So that's becoming that opportunity that's always been there for, that's always been in the back of my mind. I want to tell this particular story, but now I like to tell smaller stories. So it's his personal story about, because it was his great, I think, third great grandfather was a chief at that time. But tell these smaller stories as I explain bigger concepts.
Yeah, so, the microism and microcosm, and then
yeah.
So let's talk about mentors, because you mentioned a mentor. What were your mentors growing up, and how did that affect your view?
Well, I'm 51 years old, but I still feel like I'm growing up, I guess, sometimes. Still so much to learn. Well, I'd hate to say it, my mother was a mentor. I mean, I don't want to hate to say it, but I don't want to tell her that. But wonderful influence in my life. John Salter was a great mentor. He was at the lunch counter with my mom. And so that lunch counter photo is the three people sitting at the lunch counter. It's actually, it's actually the most integrated lunch counter, May 28th, 1963, the Jackson Woolworth sit-in. And Ann Moody's black, my mom is white, but Professor Salter is actually a tribal member. But he was a great mentor of mine. Lou Von Brown, and through the years, it's Joanne Bland is one I can mention. Dr. William Smith out of University of Utah, who is he's the gentleman who came up with the concept of racial battle fatigue. He's been a great mentor of mine, and I find new mentors as I go as well. I never stop trying to learn. But Lou Von Brown, I think, in particular. Now, I didn't know Lou Von until about 10, 15 years ago, but his insights and his spirit, we just connect.
So, how is your foundation different than others that are out there?
Well, we're a civil rights organization, a nonprofit, but we're white, and that's an important element to understand. Mm-hmm. And some people go, well, "What? That sounds a little weird that you're even willing to say that." But representation goes both ways, and I'll give a great example. My mother and I were speaking at a international law firm. And at the end of it, and we're talking about racism and civil rights movement and these sort of things. And at the end of it, someone said, do you feel you're taking away from Black voices to talk about these things, from their opportunities to talk about this? And I said, well, let's just be honest. If you're willing to listen to those voices, we wouldn't be here talking to you. Racism is a white disease that we ask everyone else to cure. And so we should be talking about these things, right? Jane Elliott, she loves to say, look, we're all from Africa. Get over it, right? But boy, I have a podcast with her and I have this recorded phone call of my mom and Jane Elliott it's just wild stuff. I've never put it up yet, but man, she's fun, exhausting, but fun. But yeah, so I mean, it's important for people who look like me, white male, to see that yes, we can actually, do something. That we did do stuff. So there's, and yeah, I mean, in education realm, 80% of the teachers are white women, and so they can see my mom and feel comfortable and go, okay, I feel comfortable talking about this. I don't know if I could talk about Dr. King. Can I talk about Rosa Parks? Because I'm not black, I'm white, but they can see my mom. They could talk about that. But then my mom, it's almost a Pandora's box at that point, because now you're gonna learn so much more because of how she's so interconnected to so many people, from Medgar to Martin, and everyone in between. She's always coming up with someone new that I didn't even know that she even knew. But yeah, it's a fascinating exploration. And our foundation, we do teacher training, DEI training. We do, we do assemblies with, through all the grades and stuff like that, speaking engagements in these films, micro scholarships for HBCU students. So yeah, we continue the work that my mother was a part of.
How can a regular person get involved if they're interested in social justice?
My mom's got a very simple formula that frustrates everybody. So I'll give that as a two-part answer. So the first is what my mom likes to say is, find a problem, get some friends together, and go solve it. And they're like, yeah, but what about this and that? She goes, okay, let me repeat this one more time. My mom once said, she goes, okay, look, because they were like, oh, what about Facebook? What about this? She goes, let me know. Okay, look, find a problem, get some friends together, and go solve it. How you go about doing that is entirely up to you. But just do something. My mom says, I saw something was wrong and decided to do something about it. It takes all of us to make a difference. Now, people like a little more answers than that. And so I did a book. We have a lot of kids' books, but we finally did an adult book called Get Back to the Counter, 7 Lessons from a Civil Rights Icon. And it's these 7 different principles of, quite frankly, of not just for life. And I purposely didn't say, success principles or life principles, but it's also a blueprint for, okay, well, if you want to start becoming an advocate, start trying to make a difference. Here's what my mom did. This is the principles that she lived by. And we illustrate those principles. Not only do we get to the psychology of it, but we also illustrate those principles with stories from the civil rights movement that she was a part of, her stories, and some life stories in general. But that's like, okay, you want the shortcut blueprint? Here it is, right? For whatever that might look like for you, whatever you're trying to get involved in.
And how do you see the progress of DEI, the front of that progressing, that encourages you?
Well, there's always the ebb and flow with DEI. I mean, obviously in 2020, we saw this great outpouring, and all these organizations were, pumping millions of dollars and doing DEI and supporting HBCUs with scholarships and everything. This is on the heels, of course, of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so forth. And now we're seeing that these tech companies and so forth, a lot of these companies are pulling back from it. It's business as usual. The tone is set at the top. And so when you find organizations that are committed, it's because the CEO and the executive team is committed. Otherwise, it's just performative. They put it on a website. And I see this at universities even. You don't even find a chief of DEI. It's just a single page with a statement of some that they could have just had Chat GPT create for them, right? But it's organizations that really work to understand it and to find ways to create an environment that really is inclusive. It's not easy, but I am encouraged that you are seeing more organizations today. Even though there's been a drop off, there's still more organizations that are really working hard to try to make a difference. They're actually providing funding for their employment resource groups and so forth. They're allowing these certain organizations to even exist. But when things get tough, it's usually where the axe falls on what they feel are non-essential, jobs and so forth. I saw that recently at Amazon, as a matter of fact. They hacked up their DEI team, cut a lot of people from that. It's like, like, you guys are making hundreds of billions of dollars. You can do a little better than that.
So
But
then what's your business case though when you run into corporates that are cutting back and the universities cutting back?
yeah, well, it's a real simple proposition. I mean, you're in business to make money. This is capitalism, right? And employees will either make you money or lose you money. You need to decide what that's going to look like for you. If you cannot relate to your customers, or if you have employees who sexually harass or do whatever. I mean, and now with social media, we're seeing that a lot more, wherein people are being held accountable for their actions they take that they thought they were going to get away with, but now all of a sudden you see that on video. They said or did something, and now it's like, hey, they work for so and so, right? There's that immediate backlash. The inability to see the world and understand it fully is a detriment, and it will cost you money. You will lose business because of it. Actually in our training that we have in our platform that we use. So when my mother and I come and speak at places, my mother or I or both of us, we actually provide seats, licenses for companies to use our DEI platform as part of that package. So it's not enough for us to come and speak. What are you going to do next? But we actually have real world examples of what took place in different organizations of how they lost money, and it's very real.
So what is your next?
That's a great question. I said I was done with films for a little bit, and then someone said, "Hey, you know what? We got this great idea. We probably." I'm like, I've been wanting to do that story for a while. So yeah, it'll be a short film, but we're really exploring how we can do that. I have another, the teacher training. We're putting together a teacher training platform so we can provide the training for free for educators. Really, we've been in a beta phase on our micro scholarships for HBCU students, and we are fully launching that this semester. So that's exciting for us. And I've got another book that I've been working on for quite a while, that in the background, that it's a different type of book. It's called Morning Talk with Mom and Other Conversations. And my mom will say some of the craziest stuff, and it's really funny, sometimes poignant and whatever else. But I've captured these conversations over the years. And so it's just this really fun banter back and forth. And then, okay, what's the context behind that from a historical standpoint? But very different book, but just something that's fun. And working on a narrative, developing a narrative feature on my mom's story as well. I've been asked to try to start putting that together, from a script standpoint and so forth. And then I've got this podcast that we've been wanting to do for a long time. So when we interviewed my mom and her friends for the first film back in 2011, we have about 20 hours of interview content. All you're seeing is about 90 minutes of that content. So what I want to do is I've been wanting to put together a very robust, take all that content, all these stories that exist, and the different people we interview, and tell their stories as well. So that's probably like, 30-minute episodes, right? But with narration and, just basically like mini documentaries without all the visuals and stuff. So there's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, yeah.
How do you have the energy and the time to do it all? Oh my goodness.
I just try. We just keep trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So curious.
Huh?
But it's all said and done. What kind of legacy would you like to leave?
It's kind of funny. My mom says, it's after 50 years, people start to think you're interesting. After all this, no one really cared about all the stuff they were doing back then, and now all of a sudden everyone wants to talk to her. And I think it kind of comes back to me as the same thing of what she says is, when people ask her why she did it, she said, I just did it because it was the right thing to do. I saw something was wrong and decided to do something about it. I just want, hopefully And, when it's all said and done and counted, when we're particularly through this time of history that we've been through, over the past, 8 years or so, is to really just that someone goes, yeah, he was there and he did something about it, tried to add to the conversation, and in particular capturing some of these stories that we're losing as these people age out. So yeah, it's just was willing to tell the truth.
Can't ask for better than that.
Yeah.
Right?
Never been asked that.
You couldn't. I mean, I tell stories in my business in a different capacity, but it's absolutely true. If no one tells those stories, they're lost.
Yeah. I don't know. I just, you hope you make a difference, but that's not why you do it. You don't do it because you think, you're going to impact a whole bunch of lives. You do it because you feel it's important to do. And that, I say, like, as my mom once said, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing's not an option. And I just want to make sure I'm doing my something. So it's when I see people come up to my mom, total strangers, in tears, just thanking her for what she did because they learned about it. It's like, okay, I had a little something in that, and they carry that forward. Particularly when we're working with students, with kids in elementary school and high school and stuff, and that's where the real impact we know is really going to take place over the years. Is some of these kids might not remember it at the moment, but they'll look back when they look at, go to a museum or whatever else, and be able to feel that connection and go, wow, I met, I met that lady's son and whatever else. And, it becomes very real and tangible for them.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the interview. You shedded some really interesting insights, and where can people see your documentaries and get the books, and where would they go?
Best place to go is to our foundation website, thejtmfoundation.org, or Google my mom's name, Joan Mulholland, but otherwise thejtmfoundation.org. And you can go there, you can learn how to donate to help make a difference. I mean, that's how some people can make a difference, with the pocketbooks and stuff. And that's how we do the films. That's how we do the scholarships and these sort of things, and assemblies and such. And then, we have our books there. We have, the films that are there, either on DVD, but particularly on streaming. We have films on Amazon Prime right now and on Showtime, and we'll see what the Emmett Till film did get picked up, so we'll find out eventually where that lands as well. But all of those are available as well on streaming through our website as well. So
sounds great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it, and feel free to post any questions so we can be inspired by new content. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more, visit our website at bakercreative.co.